Power is often imagined to be most vulnerable when it is being attacked. But the British Empire faced its most dangerous year when no enemy fired a shot at it. This essay will reframe the moment when Britain's authority did not collapse under invasion, but loosened under its own command. When its leaders made decisions to preserve imperial control that quietly made that control impossible to restore. Because what was threatened was not territory. It was obedience. And once obedience begins to detach from authority, the empire that remains can still issue orders long after its power to define reality has already begun to leave it. In 1931, the British Empire still governed nearly a quarter of the Earth's land and population. Its center remained in London, where Parliament continued to legislate for territories spanning from Canada to India. Its financial system was anchored by the Bank of England, and its currency, sterling, functioned as the connective tissue of imperial trade. The monarch, George V, still presided over an empire on which the sun did not set. And yet in September of that year, Britain abandoned the gold standard. The decision came suddenly. Investors had begun withdrawing gold reserves. Confidence in sterling weakened. Rather than defend the currency indefinitely, Britain chose to let its value float. On paper, this was a financial adjustment. But the empire had not been built on paper. It had been built on the assumption that British guarantees were permanent. That assumption had governed colonial budgets, trade routes, and political loyalty for decades. And now, quietly, Britain had demonstrated that even its most fundamental commitments could be revised. There was no battlefield. There was only a decision, and its consequences moved outward faster than any army could have. At the center of this decision stood Ramsay MacDonald, who led a fragile national government formed during financial crisis. His administration did not intend to weaken the empire. It believed it was preserving it. Sterling needed flexibility to survive, but imperial authority had depended on rigidity. For generations, dominions like Canada, Australia, and South Africa had structured their economies around sterling's fixed value. Their reserves were held in London, their trade balanced through British markets. This arrangement created efficiency. It also created dependence, and dependence created obedience. When Britain left gold, sterling fell. Not catastrophically, not immediately, but enough. Enough for Dominion governments to recognize that Britain's financial decisions could now reshape their domestic stability without their consent. Enough to introduce uncertainty into a system that had previously presented itself as immovable. And uncertainty was not something imperial authority had been designed to survive. There was no declaration, no dominion announced rebellion. Instead, they adjusted. They diversified reserves. They reconsidered trade alignments. They began to think of their economic survival as separable from Britain's. This shift happened quietly, inside treasury offices and parliamentary committees, but it marked the beginning of a new kind of independence. Not political independence, something more dangerous, psychological independence. Because empires do not rely only on enforcement, they rely on expectation, on the belief that the center will remain what it has always been. And Britain had just shown that it could not guarantee that continuity. In December of that same year, Britain formalized a second decision. Parliament passed the Statute of Westminster. It granted Dominions full legislative autonomy. On its surface, this was presented as recognition of political maturity. An evolution, a gesture of trust. But gestures of trust can also reveal the absence of alternatives. Britain did not grant this autonomy from a position of unchallenged strength. It granted it because the mechanisms of control were becoming harder to maintain. Distance had not changed, but confidence had. Dominion leaders no longer saw obedience as automatic. They saw it as conditional, and conditional obedience is already a form of exit. Britain still believed the empire would endure. Its leaders saw the statute as a way to preserve unity voluntarily. They believed formalizing autonomy would strengthen loyalty. But loyalty that must be renegotiated has already begun to transform, because authority is most stable when it is invisible, when it does not need to be explained. The statute explained it, defined it, limited it, and by limiting it, made its boundaries visible for the first time. The empire had not lost territory. It had lost inevitability. There was no public panic, no sudden collapse. Imperial maps remained unchanged. British governors continued their duties. Orders continued to move outward. Reports continued to move inward. But something fundamental had shifted. The empire's future was no longer assumed. It was being discussed, debated, contingent. Inside Britain, this did not feel like surrender. It felt like adaptation, pragmatism. The empire had survived wars, rebellions, and revolutions. It would survive this adjustment too. But war had always clarified authority. It forced declarations, chose sides, defined loyalty through action. This moment did something different. It allowed distance to grow without confrontation. It allowed independence to form without resistance. It allowed obedience to weaken without disobedience ever being declared. And this made it harder to see, harder to resist, harder to reverse, because authority depends on recognition. And recognition had begun to disperse, not vanish, not yet, but disperse. Dominion governments still affirmed loyalty to the crown. They still used British institutions. They still spoke the language of imperial unity. But they no longer assumed British permanence. They planned for alternatives. And planning for alternatives is how departure begins. Britain could still command its empire, but it could no longer command its imagination. The change did not arrive everywhere at once. In India, nationalist movements continued to challenge British rule. In Africa, colonial administrations still operated with confidence, but the example had been set at the top. The empire's most loyal territories had been granted the legal right to refuse. And once refusal becomes legal, authority must rely on persuasion. Persuasion is slower, less certain, more vulnerable to time. Britain did not experience immediate loss. The empire remained vast throughout the 1930s. It would even fight another world war. It would still appear powerful, but its power had changed form. It was now operating on momentum, on structures built under assumptions that no longer fully existed. This is what made 1931 dangerous. Not because the empire fell, but because it continued. Because continuation allowed its leaders to believe control remained intact. They still saw maps colored in red, still heard affirmations of loyalty, still governed millions, but they had already conceded the principle that made those maps permanent. They had accepted that imperial authority could be revised, that it could be negotiated, that it was not fixed. And once authority accepts its own negotiability, it becomes something else. Not command, not permanence, something closer to influence. Influence can be respected, but it can also be left behind. The empire would spend the next decades adjusting to this new reality, granting independence, reorganizing relationships, redefining its purpose. Each change would appear deliberate, managed, orderly, but they were following a path that had quietly opened in 1931. A path created not by defeat, but by decision. Not by rebellion, but by recognition. Britain had acted to preserve itself, and in doing so had revealed its limits, limits that could not be unseen, limits that would shape every choice that followed, even as the empire reached its greatest territorial extent, even as it appeared victorious in war. Its authority had already crossed a threshold. It could continue, but it could no longer return, because power is not defined by what it controls. It is defined by what it no longer needs to prove. And in 1931, Britain had needed to prove it, to reassure markets, to reassure dominions, to reassure itself. And reassurance is not something permanent power requires. It is something power requires when permanence has begun to loosen. The empire would endure for years, decades even. Its symbols would remain, Its institutions would adapt. Its voice would still carry weight. But beneath that continuity was a quieter condition, authority that continued to speak in the language of inevitability, while operating inside the reality of its absence. If this story gave you something to think about, consider subscribing to Timeless Questions. We explore history, philosophy, and the patterns that quietly guide human behavior.